Welcome everybody to Embodied Impact, where today we will be exploring how words create worlds with Dominic Knight. If you missed the first session with Dom, I'd highly recommend that you check that out. And please click the link below to follow so that we can update you on our live sessions, future retreats, workshops, and men's groups. If you have any questions, there's a question bar on the right-hand side. Please drop them in there and then we'll deal with them as they pop up. I'd like to welcome Dom back. And for anyone who doesn't know Dominic, he's one of London's most renowned Harley Street-based NLP master practitioners, having worked with clients ranging from teens to presidents, and having the privilege of working with him in that space and knowing exactly how he works and the superstar that he is. It's nice to have you back with us again, dude.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to this afternoon's presentation, and feel free to ask questions as well along the way. It's a very important, very powerful topic, and I will also be giving a few tips as well as we move along. So to begin with, one of the things which I was reflecting on yesterday, and I put it on paper here, was the idea that the most constructive as well as the most destructive force in the entire universe is emotion, right? And words evoke emotions because words are metabolized by the body. If someone says something, they could say something loving, they could say something sexual, they could say something funny, they could say something prejudiced, whatever it is. Those words will affect and evoke a biological response in you, right? But the most powerful words are the words that you say to yourself and how you communicate, how one communicates with themselves, because the cortex of the brain that deals with kinesthetic, the feeling side, crosses over with our auditory side of the brain. So internal dialogue is affecting your biochemistry, it's affecting your neurology. And the most tested drug in the world are placebos, which are based on just beliefs. They're based on words. They're not even real. There's no real substance to it, yet they can work very effectively. You know, again, it just illustrates how powerful words are. I would also like to highlight how words, dependent on how we interpret them, it will affect what we feel. So follow along with me here. For example, if someone says that they're afraid of something, but fear is the same chemical response as excitement. So if you change the word, what it does is it can start interrupting the signal that was causing the inhibition in the first place. So just slight changes of words can have a profound effect. It's the words, and when we change the words and we start altering the interpretation. So for example, if someone was petrified of a roller coaster and you force them on there, if their interpretation is fear and they're terrified and they're imagining all these scary scenarios, it will create all sorts of disruptions to the body. There'll be heightened blood pressure. You'll have issues with anxiety rising, with cortisol levels. But if someone is on a roller coaster and they love it, it's like, wow, there's the exhilaration and there's dopamine and there's serotonin, but it's the same ride. So what you've got there is the interpretation changes the response. Therefore, it's very important to learn to respond in the direction that you so wish and that you choose, as opposed to just reacting randomly. I hope that makes sense. You know, it's how you communicate. Now, the title of our presentation today, like how words create worlds, it's because what we communicate to one another and what we communicate to ourselves, it's literally the structure, it's the foundation of reality. And if you're able to present ideas in a powerful way, not only to others, but to yourself, where you're convinced in what you're saying, then you have the potential to really move forward effectively in your life. Look, let me give you an example. Like many people, they'll say, well, you know, I really want to do this, or they'll say to the external world, I'm going to do this, do this, do this. But if they don't believe it within themselves, if the internal communication isn't aligned with what they're saying externally, they're not going anywhere. So the internal communication needs to be aligned with what you say externally. And in doing so, you develop and you build not only that foundation for yourself, but a mechanism that will allow yourself to move effectively forward. Now, building upon the thing that I started off with, where I said that words evoke emotions. When an emotion is evoked, it will propel you in a particular direction. And if you do that thing consistently enough, it becomes habitual. So what we want to do in order to be essentially architects of our own destiny is to ensure that we converse as effectively with ourselves as possible, as well as with the external world. Now, there's an idea that I'm going to present to you here, and reflect on what I'm saying here, because it's a very, very important point. In a lot of world religions, as well as philosophies, they speak about this idea of non-judgment. Now, non-judgment means two things. It's not just a surface level, well, don't judge people. No, it's also not judging external circumstances as they are. If you're judging it, or you're presupposing something, or you're investing a belief in that thing, it may restrict you from moving forward. If you don't judge the circumstances and you don't judge others, and you have a vision for what you want, and you communicate effectively, evoke the requisite emotions, and take steps forward, it's very likely that you'll be able to get to your destination. I recently watched the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, which is the movie about my brain slowed down for a moment. Queen, Freddie Mercury. Okay, in the opening scene, you see that he's working for an airport, an airline, and he's loading up baggage, and people are calling him Packy and this and that, but as they're insulting him and they're throwing racist slurs at him, is impervious to it. It's like, well, he looks at it, but it doesn't even register. He goes to his school, his college. It looks a little bit awkward. He's got these big teeth, and people are poking fun at him, but he doesn't even, it literally doesn't register. It's almost as if he's oblivious to it. Then a scene comes where finally he gets on stage in front of these college students, and they're going, well, get the Packy on the stage and this and that, and they're throwing these slurs at him. And again, it's just like he's oblivious to it. And then he starts singing, and he captivates the entire crowd, the entire audience. And that's powerful. That's oblivious to what's going on in the external world. Toward the final scenes, you see that he becomes one of the most successful pop stars in history, with to my understanding, the biggest audience in the history ever in the world of music. He ended up with the biggest audience, oblivious to it all. If we look at the likes of Audrey Hepburn, for example, or you could say a Coco Chanel, they're doing things which were completely contradictory to the norm in terms of how they dressed, in terms of how they carried themselves, but they weren't doing it to fight for or to provoke a stance. They were being authentic to themselves. So they were above the good or bad opinions of others. Those opinions were irrelevant. They weren't there to try and make a stance. They were there being themselves. And as a natural result of that, you have the world falling in love with these figures. You know, I could throw more names at you, from the likes of Muhammad Ali. You'll find with these characters and with these people, and the ones that that pave the way for the future, they're all authentic to themselves. They're authentic to their cause. They're not doing it for a reaction. As you see, they're not doing it in an attempt. It's not contrived. In fact, it's real. When you're authentic and you're real, people in the world gravitate towards you.
Dude, it's like what we were saying before about the integrity between word and deed.
Exactly. I mean, the integrity, because the integrity will be consistent with your belief in what you're saying. And this is why the idea of non-judgment, not judging others, and the reason I'll explain to you why judgment of others is actually completely wrong, is because anything that we experience or that we do or that we see in another, we have done in some form ourselves. So like, for example, like if someone's prejudiced, well, have you ever been prejudiced? You probably were at some stage, but then you learned to override that and overcome that. For example, if you look at the, you know, some of the greatest people in history, they had some very, very not only shady but very disrupted pasts, even from the likes of Gandhi to Martin Luther King to Mandela. You're talking a really not healthy past, but they transcended, they went beyond that. Do you see that was not defining who they were? They were flexible enough to create change within themselves and change within society. And that brings me to the point of, and this was a point I was going to touch on a little bit later on, but I think it's really important to emphasize it now, that we are not our biography, right? And when we meet someone and we're intimate with that person, if we have someone that we intend to be a life partner, we want to ensure that we convey to them, now, irrespective of where they came from, whatever good they done in the past or bad that they done in the past, or that they did or that they didn't do, or what they should have done or what they haven't done, is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. It means nothing. That person's in front of you. So then you create that connection with them. The most difficult thing that people go through and that hold people back in life is, it's actually these two components of shame and guilt. And it's very rarely highlighted. And therefore, it's really important that to recognize if someone has guilt or shame about something in the past, it means that they've repented for that. They've moved on from that. That's not them anymore. So for others to judge them on past activities is completely unfair. They've already paid the price for that. So therefore, it's important to express that when you meet with someone or they're your partner, to express that they're completely free, right? Then you're in this area of non-judgment with them. Mas, was there a...
Tom, in therapy, one of the first, so one of the first things that we learn when doing a therapy training is this idea of bracketing assumptions. And you can see in the initial stages of, you know, your therapy training that it's super difficult because we're always in a state of judging everything. I think, you know, it's so deeply ingrained in our biology, always risk assessing everything. So when it comes to having that conversation with someone who's in front of you, who's a little bit different, and this kind of goes into relationships as well, you're naturally going to go to that space of judging this person against your experiences that you've had. But that idea of sort of non-judgment and being able to sit with that space and actually allow that person to unfold their story and actually be with that is immensely powerful. But not only that, it's one of the greatest tools in bringing people closer together.
Well, it does bring them closer together, and it also, and this is something I was reflecting on, any mental health issue or any psychological disorder, I think every human being has experienced it in some form, in some way or another. For example, someone's obsessive. Well, who hasn't double-checked their door at some time? Who hasn't obsessed? Who hasn't been angry? Who hasn't been anxious? You see, it's all natural. Who hasn't lost their appetite? Who hasn't thrown up? No, it's all normal. These are all normal things that we experience as human beings. They're an abnormality if there's an exaggeration of them, if they're appearing too much. So, for example, if something bad happened and you're not angry or upset about it, well, you need to be upset and angry about it. It's contextual. But if you're upset and angry all the time, well, there's a disorder there. There's something that needs to be toned down. And normally, to tone it down is to give that person ownership. Recently, a friend of mine had called me up and he said that a guy that his cousin used to work on the door as a bouncer, and he's had some spiritual awakening and had been a bouncer for 20 years, and now he's very spiritual, and he is haunted by memories of people that were racist to him when he was in his youth. So I pick up the phone and I call this guy up, and I'm speaking with him, and I said, well, it must have been really tough for you. And I'm not going to, in any way, shape, or form, condone what you had gone through, or I will not minimize it in any way. Now, the guy is Sikh, so my first question to him was like, how would you feel with, like, let's say one of your relatives was to marry someone from Pakistan? I just threw it out there. And if you know a little bit about these communities, there's always a little bit of friction, and essentially his brain was frying at that moment. Like, okay, look, take ownership. You have had, or maybe you currently will carry some resentment or some prejudice or some judgment towards another nation or towards another group of people or belief. So you diffuse it. It's not to be ashamed of. It's something that you experience. It's there, but it's to overcome. Look at, the great quote from Bruce Lee, under the heavens, we are but one family. And then what I delved in a little bit further with him, because he was saying, well, when I was in my 20s, they were racist to me, and I could have made it in cricket. He became a 2-time world stick fighting champion. So I said, well, do you not see how, as unpleasant those experiences were in the past, there was a catalyst for you to create more out of yourself? Let's diffuse it. Let's not only look at the bad, but let's look at the good. That, you've transcended that. Now let's take things into a place of non-judgment. If someone had done something to you in the past, or someone presently says something to you, look, why not be the greatest expression of yourself and be impervious to that? And if you look at the world and the universe, the example I was saying to you of like Freddie Mercury, Audrey Hepburn, whoever you look at, when they're in a place where they're living their life on their terms, it's almost like the world will start conforming to that. The external pressures and the difficulties, when you transcend that by not engaging with it, it's almost like unplugging yourself from that.
Dude, it's like, I guess, if you travel to a different country and you don't speak the language, they could be literally rinsing you for all that you're worth, but your brain hasn't clicked into the actual meaning behind what's being said. And I wonder if we can sort of steer this towards relationships, because what I see a lot of the time is, couples are trying to create this, I guess, joint linguistic space where they can speak and communicate with each other very well. But often what we're doing is that we're communicating in a different way with the people that are around us. And that communication is actually influencing our togetherness. And I wonder if we can kind of steer this towards, how does this sort of manifest and play out in relationships?
Well, we all have our own set of values, and we have our own ideas of what it means to be loved and to be in love. And I think what we find, or what we tend to find, is that one tends to project their expectation on another. But because we're as individual as our own fingerprints, it's about, when you're in the presence of that person, accepting them completely as they are, without projecting or presuming that you know what they need, and being observant to their needs, and not the needs that are explicitly said always. It may be more effective to observe their behavior and observe things that they say in conversation and pick up on that. And that really comes down to being completely present with the person that you're with. And in doing so and accepting the person that you're with, then you create the potential for something special. And also the idea of the whole thing of relationships, because it's not really down to the thing of just a human emotion, or it's just an infatuation, because the problem with that is emotions and feelings may be fleeting. But let me build upon this idea for you. Let's say you've never played the piano before and you start taking lessons. You put a whole bunch of people who've never played and they all play together, right? Everyone will have a different rate of learning. Some will learn really quickly, some slower, but predictably they all plateau. That holds true for everything in human life. The relationship will inevitably plateau. The ones that continue with a next spike of growth, if you're working through those plateaus. The other thing to understand is the relationship, it's dynamic. It's like it's alive. So your partner's act of love may be by challenging you, or it may be by comforting you, or it may be by tearing you down or lifting you up. They're all acts of love. It depends on what the intent was behind that. And that brings me upon, this is actually quite funny. I was watching an interview by the guy who started Quest Bars, and he was kind of like rags to selling the company for $1 billion. And this is why I'm saying it's quite amusing. He said that when he was growing up and in his teens, his mother would say that he was good for nothing. He starts dating this girl, and the father says, "What the hell are you doing with this loser?" And he turns around and he says in his interview, "You know what? They were right. I was a complete loser. I actually needed to hear that." So it's, what do you do with that when you hear something? You can use it as a catalyst to propel yourself forward. It may be true or it may not be true. If it's true, then you can work upon it. If it's not true, you can learn to detach yourself from that turbulence. It's much like if you're in an airplane, there's turbulence, okay, that's uncomfortable, but you don't live there. You start learning to be impervious to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dom, I also wanted to pose a question that James had put into the question box. He was asking what one of your personal experiences was in reaching that place of non-judgment.
Well, I mean, look, the thing is, think of it this way. What do you want to have for supper this evening? Or what do you want to have for breakfast? Or, you walk into a shop, well, do I choose this or do I choose that? Do I go for the sugar? Do I go for the low carb? Do I go for higher fat? Do I go for keto? Do you see, our brains are judging continuously. What I do, if an emotion is evoked, like someone just, let's say they say something and it's unpleasant, I immediately learn to humble myself. Well, I look at where I've displayed that. So someone cuts me up in traffic. Well, I've cut people up in traffic. I kind of, maybe the person's in a rush. I start taking ownership myself to diffuse it. Do you see? Because the reality is it's true. Do you see? So it's true. So the non-judgment comes in that form. If someone's doing something, well, you may have gone so far ahead of them, but if you look back into your life and throughout your life, you've had all sorts of erroneous ideas and ridiculous judgments and prejudices and stuff, but you've gone beyond that. It's to not live in that anymore, and this is how I do it. And then the other thing is, in terms of non-judgment in the way of constructing the reality that you want, or to align yourself with the life, manifest the things that you want, that non-judgment, what I do in that is immerse myself in the belief that, look, whatever this force, what is that constructed the whole universe, you're an impression, you're an idea of that creator. And think of it this way, that you can't point to anything in the tangible world in existence that was not first an idea in someone's mind, right? So if you say imagination is real, it's which was, I think it was Picasso or some other great artist said imagination, imagination is real. Yeah, it is real. It really is. You have an impulse of thought. Maybe it's not tangible, but you've got something that's real. So non-judgment in terms of not judging your current circumstances, what it is recognizing and realizing that imagination is constructive. So your role is to imagine as vividly as you can and allow your mind to evoke the feelings as if that were real, and then you start living in that assumption. If you act, think, behave according to the highest ideal of yourself, then what will happen? It becomes inevitable. You know, we are what we think about most of the time. So this is why have pleasant thoughts, you know, imagine, think the very best for yourself, think the very best for others. Those thoughts are transmitted, they become reflected on one another. And I hope that was a sufficient answer. If you wish, I may elaborate, but if there are other questions.
Dude, it's such an interesting point, because I mean, last night we were having dinner with my niece and nephew, and they're 8 and 10, and they were both amongst themselves talking about, you know, what they want to get in life and what they want and things like that. And you could see the 10-year-old already feeling somewhat restricted in his dreams and wanting to go out there and get, in comparison to the 8-year-old. And I just felt super compelled at that point to actually reinforce exactly what you're saying here, that it's that imagination needs to be instilled deeper in them, to actually allow them to sort of see it in every single shape, way, and form. Because if not, we become so overridden with becoming language that we move away from that real felt creative space. And I think, you know, even in relationships, it's that plays out a lot, where we kind of dampen each other's dreams and aspirations and things like that, and get caught up too much in that linguistic side.
It's true. And because it's almost like, you know, and people are fearful and pessimistic more by nature anyway. So the moment they start hearing negative suggestions and thoughts and ideas, what's happening? It's reinforcing the problems that they already have with themselves. That's why it's really important to develop and build a way completely out of that. And I had developed a program for schools a number of years ago. And one of the things which I was emphasizing with the young people I was working with was that certain people in life, they develop a lot later on, like Einstein. You can talk about people who are mediocre students, and later on in life, they become exceptional. So as a child grows up, they're constantly comparing themselves. But if we have a framework of showing them that not to compare, because what they've got is unique, and people learn and develop at different ages, and you really can be and do what you want. The reality is your brain, the frontal lobe, it completely lights up when you're doing the things that you really like. You do exceptionally well at that. So you are engineered to succeed at the things that you really like, you know. So the more that those ideas can be built upon. But Massimo, I agree with you. It's like as the child grows from the 8, 9, 10, from the 8 is absolute the purity. And I think the installation and the ideas of cultivating that imagination throughout, and like you can do what you want, invest the time, the energies into it, and you'll make it happen. You'll set the bar so high, you can create something in a league of its own. So once those ideas are cultivated, you'll see the expression of that. You'll see the expression of that manifest, and I think it's really, really very, very important.
I mean, can we maybe plug in here this whole piece of like, how do we really use language so that we can create that future rather than using it to sort of like escape the present moment? So how do we basically turn this into something that becomes concrete?
Well, again, you know, and this is built up upon the question that you just asked, because you're putting it into the future. We don't want to do that. We want to put it in the present. So the language will be constructed in the present tense. And look, here's the thing. The subconscious, the mind when you're imagining something, it doesn't distinguish whether it's real or whether it's imagined. So if you're imagining something in the future, you're imagining something constantly in the future. And this is why it's really important in the present tense. If you said to me, yeah, but it hasn't happened yet, this or that, no, I'm lying to you, but you're not. You're using your imagination like an architect. You're constructing something. Yes, we're going to lay the framework for it. We're going to get the contractors later on. That's all great. Do that. But it's the end in mind. If you look at the greatest works of art, if you look at the greatest cathedrals, mosques, temples, what are they? They're all things that were created not for, well, I just want to make some quick money out of this, just make this happen now. No, they were created for millennia. These were astronomical visions. So you create something beautiful, the end in mind, and then you start constructing towards that. You're building it as if it's already occurred. That's why with the words, what you're doing is when you're planning out how you would like your future to be, how you want to be as a person, it's really important for all of that to be in the present tense, not at a future date. So you're assuming it because it's the assumption which is where the power is at. And then your mind, what it does is it will transmit to you the feelings that will enable you to do those things. And you'll find you're suddenly doing things without even realizing it. You go on autopilot without even thinking about it. There's a biologist, Rupert Sheldrake, I believe a Cambridge graduate, and he's the guy who championed the idea of morphogenic fields, which is really quite interesting. And he was looking at various studies how these lab rats that were trained to escape out of water, it took a particular amount of time to train them to do that. And then their offspring, it took them a little less time. And then they replicated the experiment in a different part of the planet, and the rats picked that up immediately. So he's done a lot of experiments on that. Like, what is this? So when you have a group of people doing something, there really is something to this whole thing of collective consciousness. It's really powerful. So we are interconnected in one way, shape, or form. But in order to build what you want for your future, you build it in the present as if it's already there. And then you're living in that assumption, you're taking the steps towards the realization of that. And this way, this is what happens. This is what's really powerful about it. Look, when I was mentioning the point of, let's say, the Freddie Mercury, I guarantee he was dreaming about huge audiences while he was, while people were shouting racist slurs at him. It's just like the image, the dreams were there. It wasn't, well, I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to set a whole time frame to be able to do this. Yes, time frames and that have a time and place, but it's really important to construct in the present reality and then have the flexibility toward moving towards that. Again, that comes down to the thing of non-judgment, where you're not judging your circumstances. In terms of the things you've wanted, not a single one of us have been able to map out or root out exactly how we got the things that we wanted. Like, it's impossible. You wanted those things. It's not that, well, they just appeared, you worked for it, but no, they followed a course of events, but you didn't know what those course of events were, but you knew what you wanted and it happened.
So it's again being more concerned with the outcome rather than the process.
Well, here's the thing. You enjoy the process, you're going to do it anyway. Like, think of it this way, so my children, when they were very young, 21 and 23, when I was raising them, it was always like, well, you do have anything. I would put them in environments, show them things, have them watch things of people that were successful. When my son was 14, I put him in Hodger Grace's academy. There's all world champions there. So it's just in that environment, he's living it, he's breathing it. So ultimately he's now a GB gold medalist, European gold medalist. Why? It's just like he's in that environment. The mindset is there. It's the ecology, it's the environment, right? I couldn't have planned, well, I'm going to plan this and all this is going to happen as such. No. You can think of the outcome, but you enjoy the process. So, for example, the example of my son. So the process enjoys, loves jiu-jitsu, MMA, boxing, lives it, breathes it. So the process is enjoyable. He wants to do that. So what we want to realize is that when we're doing a process, it's like both of you, the field of the mind, the philosophy, the psychology, the endeavoring to be more, to help people, to reach larger audiences, to make an impact on the earth. You're not forcing yourself to do that. You're not trying to read materials. Do you see? You love that process because you're doing that anyway. Makes sense?
Absolutely. And I wonder if there could be a little bit of a caveat there, because I think mostly in relationships, we avoid all the bad stuff rather than actually enjoying the process there as well. And, something I always say is try and eroticize all the different aspects of a relationship, and it brings that kind of enjoyment factor into it. But I think what you're saying, I think, really makes it more specific, that if a person is really stepping into that space with that willingness of wanting to enjoy good, bad, ugly, it doesn't make a difference, and being as present as possible, you eventually get that ultimate perfect relationship that you're looking for.
Well, and not agreed, because look, here's the thing: the difficulties and the pain, they provide the contrast, and they provide the depth of the relationship, and they provide the feelings and the emotions, because again, it's not having a delusion that a relationship is some one-sided fantasy, because that doesn't exist. It's the synthesis of complementary opposites. So you have the good and the bad, you have the difficulty, you have the support, you have the challenge, you see. So and I view it almost like the thing of turbulence. So in the terms, oh my God, that's uncomfortable in an airplane, but you're not holding on the whole time. Do you see? Like, okay, there's a moment of discomfort, but then you ride that, you work through that, and then you allow it to evolve. And the thing is, in order to have, for the relationship to absolutely flourish, it requires, and it does have those moments of difficulties and those moments of challenge, and then you work through those difficulties, so the relationship starts to flourish. It's going to be what you want it to be, but also it's being acutely aware of what your partner's needs are and fulfilling that out of the act of love. Because you've probably heard this 1,000 times where people say, well, I'm not going to do this, or she expects this from me, or, ladies, she'll say, she might say, well, I'm not going to just cook for him. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to look. It's whatever you're doing is out of love for that person because you're with them. Do you see? You're not doing that as a role, or it's your duty, or you've been assigned this role to fulfill that. No, you're doing that because that your partner, that's their expression of love. They need that. Do you see? And our wants and needs, they do change like from time to time. But on the topic of language, and this was the thing that I was reflecting on, that it's, and for a relationship to flourish is like, you want to be one that can be completely clear with your wants, needs, and desires, and vice versa with your partner, because you don't want the thing of, well, I can express this side of my life with another girl or another guy, but I can't with my primary partner. No, I mean, your primary partner, that's the most intimate relationship of your life. It's like closer than your parents, your children, because you experience things with that partner that you don't experience with anyone else on the planet. So it's deeply sacred. So therefore, it's very important for the communication to be clear, right? Without, again, it may sound like an ideal, but it's something to work towards.
I think it's actually really interesting going into what you just said with the most intimate relationship that you have. Like, you will express things that you didn't express with anybody else. And I feel what my experience is in that space is that it is connected with that level of fear. Like, what if suddenly I become unlovable, or it's not acceptable, or any of these things? And that basically is kind of like my self-talk, my self-linguistic experience in that moment. Like, how would you move into that and flipping this around to either like change the self-talk or Yeah.
Well, it's almost that there's a vulnerability with the relationship. So look, here's the interesting thing: when two people meet, and I can really only speak from a guy's perspective. So the guy is great, is moving forward, is amazing, and the relationship is working really well with her. And then what happens is when infatuation and when one falls in love, and then there's this vulnerability, the fear of loss. And they're no longer the dynamic guy that they once were because they're afraid of losing. So it's almost like, no, it's sustaining and containing and being the greatest expression of yourself, like throughout. And again, that takes a lot of self-work and reminders. It's just like anything in the world, like everything takes a level of effort. There'll be an element of risk. But what I found is the more that you're comfortable with what you're doing and what you're saying and congruent with you, the more comfortable and congruent your partner will be with what's being conveyed, because they both, both parties want to have a complete expression of themselves and complete acceptance. And again, it's something to be worked at. But it's a process, and this was one of the things I was reflecting on about. If you look, if we say like love is a thing, a tangible thing, but it really isn't a tangible thing. Like when someone falls in love, it's more to do with it's a process. Think of it this way: you meet someone for the first time, right? And you don't fall in love with that person in their presence, right? You might feel something, but what happens is you find yourself like you go home and then you start thinking about this person. So it's a process. You start romanticizing about their presence, and then you're thinking about their qualities and what you like about them, and then you start bringing their name up in every conversation, and then you write their name down, and it's just like, well, and then before you know it, you're in love. But what's happened? Who has done that? You've done it to yourself.
but it's not only that, it's ingrained in us from as young as we can go back, right?
Yes.
I mean, kids are doing it all the time, writing the love of the initials of the guy or girl that they're interested in.
They do. So it's part of how we are, but the actual process, again, it's reinforced by our own external communication. So, that person, they start to, you don't know if you have them or you don't have them, and then you're moving forward. But then what's happening is you have this dialogue within yourself. So again, the process is within. Now, when you feel and you start learning to ride that and become the greatest expression of yourself, then you're able to, I don't know if tame is the right word, but you're able to manage those feelings a lot more effectively and build something which really can be quite special. And also, without projecting or presuming, because the infatuation or love can be so intoxicating, people are blinded to everything else. So what happens is they do not enter into building that into something wonderful because they're projecting and they're presuming. Do you see? So again, we get clouded by the emotion. So the emotion needs to be a little bit more in check, and then finally, like, fully and completely embraced.
It's actually really interesting. It ties nicely to the question that James just put in. He's asking, to what extent do you think words of affirmation are necessary in a relationship, and at which level it is acceptable before it becomes overbearing?
It's dependent on the person. And this is one of the points I was saying earlier. Of a friend of mine, she was I think she was in the top 100 most attractive women in the world in Times Magazine. And it was a few years ago. And she was telling me that her boyfriend at the time would not call her beautiful, wouldn't affirm things. But she needed to hear that. She actually needed to hear that. Some people need to hear it more than others. Do you see? That was her dominant thing. And the other thing, this is quite interesting, which I read quite recently, in fact, last week. that when people are exceptionally attractive, they're more insecure and they're impervious to that. They don't know, they don't realize they're that attractive. It's the same with intelligence as well. When it reaches a certain level, you'll find an insecurity over the intelligence. They don't think they're that smart, but they really, really are. So again, when it comes to the affirmation, if your partner needs to hear that, they might need to hear it more than others. Do you see? It's not, it's observing what they need, and you want to do that as an act of love. Like, some people don't need to hear that. Some people do need to hear that. It's like the other thing, like with the love languages, and these are just general guidelines. But what's important is to observe what that person really, really needs, and then you fulfill that. Do you see?
And I think, sorry, Dom, I think it's a really important point there. And it's like when I explain about, a couple coming together, you're both speaking potentially whatever it is your language is, let's call it English, but you're both speaking a dialect of that. It's not in its purest form, if you think about it. So there are always going to be points that you're missing each other on that. And that's where I think the artistry comes in, where it's learning how to really pick up on those nuances in that other person's language so that you're hearing them better and receiving them better.
Actually, do you know, it's exactly that. Now that you've said that, it's the nuances, because there was a study done on long-lasting relationships over, I don't know, it was 30, 40-year study. But the ones that were not just lasting, because I don't believe that duration doesn't mean it's successful, because it might be a nightmare, right? So it doesn't mean anything. But if there's a duration and it's a beautiful and it's an incredible relationship, what they found, it wasn't the huge, massive acts of gestures of, I'm going to suddenly do this and this. No, it was just these small micro things throughout the way. It's being attentive to your partner's needs and wants. Do you see? And again, it's the term that I like, what you use, Matt, the artistry. There's an artistry to that. So you're aware and you're present with your partner, and you're listening, and you're aware of their behaviors and the words that they use, and you're that way it enables you to establish a stronger connection with that person, based, and what happens is ultimately everyone wins. You're happy, your partner's happy, the relationship can flourish, and vice versa. It's not so much, well, these huge expectations for this person, that person. No, it's just like, you be the greatest expression of yourself and allow that to naturally. And if the relationship isn't meant to be, and you're able to move off from that, then you move off from that with the utmost respect for the partner that you had. Do you see that there's a level of maturity as well in all of this?
Dude, I think language for me is, I guess it's central to what we all do, but especially in being a therapist, that you're always trying to find, I guess, the deeper meaning attached to everyone else's language that they're bringing to the table. And it's even just sort of just listening to a word, what does that word mean? We were talking before about the word you used was draw, and you gave an example of spell, which I don't know if you want to speak into that, kind of sort of show how we need to really explore these things more so that we have a better sort of scope of what our language is actually, I guess, transmitting and
exactly, because it is transmitting and receiving. So like when I was saying earlier on, if we use the word spell in itself, that's to cast something. If you look at esoteric philosophies, or to draw, so what does that mean? You're drawing out something. There's such a power to it. There's such a power to the written word, to the spoken word, to how we communicate. But again, everything must be taken in context. So you're observing, you're observing the needs and the wants of the person that you're with, or the person that you want to be with, and you're learning to fulfill that. It's a whole journey of self-improvement. And actually, something which just came to mind. One of the things which I would use was, when I was working with someone, if they had, let's say someone said they had OCD or whatever it was, I'd say to them, well, no, don't use that label. What's going on with you? Don't use a label. And then they're forced to start constructing and describing what's going on. And suddenly you've got something, okay, so you're afraid of this. And so am I. And so is every human being. That's it. So why are you obsessing over it? You see, she's like, you literally get to the root when you detach the word from it. So if they say the word, so well, actually, don't use that word. Explain to me the meaning, but without using that word. Then what that does is it forces them to bring out what's really going on. And when you have that thing that's going on, then you are in a better position to deal with it and to deal with it effectively. Like, for example, let's say, you know, a girl is dating this guy and the guy's snappy all the time now. He's really great before, and now he's short-tempered. He's not sleeping well at night, and she doesn't know why. She thinks it's him, but it isn't. Maybe he has financial difficulties. Maybe it's the agitation. Maybe he's afraid of this or that, or something is wrong, but he's not externally speaking it because he's afraid to. Because by expressing that, he has a fear that he may lose her. But you see that's where the intimacy comes in. It's being able to be transparent with those things and display vulnerability where needed. And on both sides, both partners need to communicate and display to the other party that they are safe to speak and to demonstrate. And that was one of the things which I was in the beginning of the presentation that I said was, it is saying to your partner, whatever you've done in the past or haven't done in the past or could have done or should have done, it makes no relevance. It doesn't mean anything. You're the person in front of me now. So that person feels safe and they feel connected with you, then they feel free to speak, you see. I was walking. Oh, sorry, Mats, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say, Dom, that level of safety, I think, is one of the first things that we all need to approach in the beginning stages of a relationship. And it's interesting you point that out, because in most of the couples that I work with, it's a concept that is never actually worked on. It's never brought up into discussion.
Important, right?
It's super necessary, and I think that's really the stepping stone that allows you both to be triggered by the other, but like you were saying before about intentionality, and not seeing it as though if I trigger my partner, I'm intentionally hurting them, but actually in fact we're triggering each other constantly, where we create this rupture, we come back together, we create the rupture, come back together, and we're superseding that plateau that you were also talking about before. And that's what separates an amazing couple from everyone else that stagnates.
Well, it's true. It's the communication. What I was saying was a couple of weeks ago, it was, I don't know, maybe like 1 a.m. I'm walking along Green Park, and I see this guy, and there's this girl, and he's sitting right next to her, and she's in tears. She looks terrified. And as I'm walking past, obviously I can recognize what it is immediately that second, right? So I walk over, and then I sit with them, and then I just start speaking, and I could tell that she was having an anxiety attack. So this is what I said to him. I said, "Oh, how long have you guys?" I'm like kind of not even addressing what's going on with her in the moment. I said, "Well, how long have you guys been together?" And then he said, "We've been together for 2 years, and this has never happened. I've never seen this." And then I say, and then what I was doing, the therapy I was doing was completely indirect. So I knew there and then she's been like that throughout. She's been holding it in. She's been avoiding going places. He has no idea about that. She has so much shame about that. I was reading the entire dynamic, and then I was saying, I asked his name, then I'm speaking with him, and I said to him, "You know what? Your partner, she's going to be absolutely fine. It's absolutely nothing to worry about. It's much like, if you have a headache or a migraine, you know what? It immobilizes you, but it's completely harmless." So indirectly, I'm kind of helping it to that. And I said, "You know what? She may have experienced this at other times. I don't know. But, about 80% of women, 70, 80% of women have quite regular, these bouts of anxiety, almost, and actually a lot of men do as well. So suddenly she feels safe because everyone else has that. So I was saying everything to him that she's always wanted to express. So where this, but this is where the transparency comes in. People are afraid. In her mind, she was afraid that if she says to him that she experiences X, Y, and Z, that he won't be with her.
So we have like 2 more questions. One is from Daria, and she's asking, how do we overcome the issue of when you're being more attentive to the partner than they are to you?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's maintaining your frame, and it's almost, look, in most relationships, someone is more attentive than the other, and it has this kind of ebb and flow. Sometimes someone's a underdog, someone is prized, but it's learning to balance the two. And here's the thing, many times it's expressing your needs, learning to express your wants and needs to your partner. And at times, look, here's the thing as well. Too many people, they get in this dynamic of, well, that person's not doing this and this for me, so therefore I'm not going to do this and this. No, maintain who you are, keep doing, do even more. Be the greatest expression of yourself. If you don't feel your needs are met, do not compromise on who you are as a person. You don't want it to turn into a game of, well, if you do this, I'm going to do that. If you don't do this, I'm not going to do that. You never remember my birthday, so I'm going to remember yours. It's just like, it's not a battle. Like, you're not, these things, they become like juvenile games. In order for it to be a really, really great relationship, it's allow yourself to be the greatest expression of yourself. And then the other thing, again, it's a little bit of an esoteric practice, but imagine, visualize in the present moment that your partner is loving you the way you truly want to be loved. Because people walk about completely oblivious to what's going on. That's most human beings. So when people walk around oblivious to what's going on and you're imagining them at their very best, they're more susceptible to your impression, right? You may be able to trigger a change in that person by imagining them at their very best, imagining them being the way you want them to be, as opposed to taking or trying to externally do that. It's like use the tools of your imagination firstly, and don't compromise who you are. So that way, the good starts becoming reflected right back at you.
That's really beautiful. And let's just quickly do the one from James before we wrap up. And he was asking, how do you determine what the other person really needs at a deeper level?
Again, it's through observation. It's being attentive to your partner and observing what they respond to, like their favorite meals, what they'd have at Christmas, their favorite, the clothes, the music they listen to, and surprise them with the things that they, it's the thoughtfulness. It's thoughtfulness. Most times, a guy will ask a girl, when was that moment where you fell in love with me? And she'll say something that you weren't expecting, and vice versa. Well, it's the moment that you stood a particular way, you pulled the chair for me, or you didn't pull the chair for me for some people, right? But it doesn't matter what it is. There will be something there, but it's being observant of that and not compromising who you are. But what you're doing, it's just like you think in terms of acts of love as opposed to a transaction. Well, I'll do this to get this. Think of it this way. If someone's trying to be your friend and you know that they just want to get something out of you, nothing's happening. But if the person is genuine, you're present with them, it doesn't matter who it is, then there's a real connection there.
Curiosity is the word that I use. And I think it's in line with what you're saying, Dom, is that the moment that person becomes curious about the other, your worldview or the lens that you're seeing the world is very different. It's almost like kind of looking through a camera and doing street photography. You're looking for the things that are presenting themselves, and that really needs to be steered towards the partner. The moment you do that, that's when things start, you really start noticing that person.
It's that, and I really like that word, curiosity, right? So again, it's what your partner responds to. So it's this holds true for both men and women. It's like, when women say what they want, or even a man says what they want, it's not always what they're saying. Do you see? It's not always what they're saying. It's not always those words. And that's why when you observe the behavior, observe when you touch, observe with a glance, like the subconscious signals, and the body gives away far more than what than what just the external words do. And this is why it's being present with your partner. And actually, one question which I would use in therapy, but it's a really powerful question, is like, if you had all the money in the world, all the contacts in the world, all the qualifications, anyone will open any door for you to do absolutely anything that you want to do, what will you do? You just throw that. So there's no objection. Do you see? There's absolutely no objection. And then, well, you know what? Someone might say, well, I just really want to raise a family. But the problem is, in today's day and age, is what you'll find, and you'll both hear this a lot, like people will say something. Let's say a guy says, well, I want to establish this, I'll spend a lot of time with my children, but then he'll start justifying it. Or a woman will say, well, no, you know what? I don't want to work. I just want to raise beautiful, incredible children. I want to be at home. And then she'll justify that. She shouldn't need to justify that. He shouldn't need to justify that. Do you see? Based on what society is pushing out, you want to be, once again, you want to be completely liberated to say what you want, what your experiences that you would like, But that comes from that safe space of being able to say that without being criticized for it, or without being judged for it. There was just to elaborate on this point, it is learning to communicate, learning to love both sides of that human being and look at what they want and what they need. Because there's no such thing as a one-sided human being. There's two sides for every human being, right? So it's just like, well, it's learning to love both sides, right? It is the most important thing, because guess what? Both sides support you, and they support you in your own evolution and your own growth. And there was something really powerful that I listened to the other evening, and it was DeMartini was speaking about affairs, and it was such a powerful thing he said. He said, sometimes the person that your partner, let's say a relationship ended, it was a toxic relationship, it completely ended. What he said was, sometimes the person that your partner cheated you on with, the person that they were with, and that you felt that person was cheating you, that person was in fact working for you without realizing it. You wanted out of that relationship and you got it.
Yeah, I can see that.
I know, it's so true. So like, people will carry a narrative, or they'll carry a story of how badly they were hurt, but they didn't want to be there.
Yep.
Do you see?
Tom, thank you as always, bro. It's amazing to have you with us and sharing amazing insight.
Very welcome. Thank you guys for having me on there. Always a pleasure to speak to you boys and girls and everyone out there, and persons.
Great to have you, Dom. Thank you so much.
Amazing. All right, guys. Look forward to seeing you lot again soon.
Yeah,
Okay,
lots of
bye.
love.
Bye.
Have a good evening. Bye.